here.
Anil, I'm very, very excited to be sitting here with you. This is a long time coming. I think
It
I've
is.
been bugging you on email for many years to come to a CMX event, share your wisdom. I remember I saw you speak for the first time, it's probably 7, 8 years ago at a South by Southwest. And I was really moved. And it was one of the talks that always stuck out with me. Um, you were talking about ethical tech before it was cool. I don't know if it's cool now to talk about ethical tech, but
It may not be,
uh,
but
you
it
made it
is a
sound cool
fixation.
back then. So yeah, I'm really honored to have you here. Really excited for this discussion, and couldn't think of a better way to wrap up CMX Global.
Thanks so
You
much.
have been you've been in the community industry for a long time. I don't know if you called it the community industry then, but you helped build Stack Overflow. You've been building Fog Creek for 20 years, I think it is. And now you've built Glitch, another very community-driven company. So deep expertise in the world of technology and in building community, building businesses. Would love if you could just kind of share that thread for those who are getting to know you or maybe only know of your recent work, just so they understand kind of how back and deep.
Sure. Definitely. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It is long overdue. I'm glad to be here. I think, I came up in the 90s making software when the web was young. And, the idea then was this like, well, maybe you'd put something up on the web, but there wouldn't be people there. You wouldn't sort of connect there. And really, as you sort of came from the 90s into, the 2000s, there started to be all these little things popping up that were this idea of maybe a person could make the web or share something on the internet or connect with other people. And, there were the sort of early forums and early ways to connect. And the thing that really pulled me in, right, I started in 1999 doing a blog. And I saw the other people creating, what came to be called blogs. They didn't even have the sort of the word yet. And friends of mine had made some of the early tools. Ev Williams, who a lot of people know now as having created Medium and Twitter before that, was co-creator of Blogger back then. I had another friend, Brad Fitzpatrick, who created LiveJournal, which years later I would get to work on. It became part of a company that I was part of starting that, LiveJournal was the first social networking platform to get 10 million users on it back when that was considered huge. That was
I
unimaginably
was one of
huge.
those angsty little teenagers.
I
I
hear
was a
that a
little bit
lot.
more of a dead journal guy, but
But that's exactly it. Is I hear that a lot from people, and there's probably a lot of folks who don't remember those things or those before their time. But these were the first places we tested out the kind of early forms of what became social media. Like everything that we do on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Snapchat, whatever, all those things were behaviors that were sort of coming to the fore even 20 years ago. And so I was building tools for the first wave of social media publishing. I made a tool called Movable Type with some, help some friends that were launching that. And that was used to build Gawker and Huffington Post and on and on and on, just in the first year. The first year was people building these sites that became like cornerstones of media. And, it went from there. And then, like I said, with LiveJournal, they built a lot of the underlying infrastructure, even the technical infrastructure that still today is used by Facebook, is used by Wikipedia, is used by Twitter. And so, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, I definitely think there's tons of innovation and iteration that's going on. But in some ways, it's kind of like this is the same problem we've all been working on for many years. And then, and the following year sort of did that in different ways. Wanted to put those tools out in front of more people. But the common thread the whole time has been, how do you enable lots of people to connect and communicate with each other? And then how do you make sure the community that results is something you feel good about putting out in the world? Because 20 years ago, we had systematic abuse and harassment. 20 years ago, we had people spreading misinformation. 20 years ago, we had all the same problems. And there were solutions. There were ways to address it. And it felt like that was knowledge that was lost somewhere along the way. And so I think that's a lot of why I've been so motivated to really sort of bang the drum about this stuff. Is I felt like every time we made a mistake, you felt like if you run a community online and you make a mistake, the potential is somebody gets hurt. Somebody really, their lives can get ruined. Like bad things can happen. And when we learned those lessons early on, I thought, well, surely This will all get better, and nobody will still have these problems way in the distant future in 2020. And hope to make that true.
So first off, thanks for building like all the tools that have made up my childhood and career. Appreciate that.
I had a small role, but lots of people did a lot of great work.
For sure. And a lot of your work are these kinds of, whether they're social networks, content platforms, a lot of them are these large scale places for people to connect. And so the word community is thrown around quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's used to describe everything from large scale social networks to family to small groups. Glitch, the company you're running now and the community that you're building now, community is kind of like front and center on the website. It's in everything you talk about it. You're always talking about the community. I think you just published something else basically saying it's all about community. So what does that word mean to you? What does it mean for Glitch to be a strong community or anything to be a community versus a loosely connected social network, which we now know also doesn't actually translate to meaningful connection?
Yeah. It's a word that gets overused a lot. So I'm always cautious about it because I feel like I don't want to further debase the idea of community, and I start a lot from what we see in the physical world. And this is acutely true for me now living in New York City, where I am here because I have communities in my physical space and I can't participate in them. And by their absence, I know they're real communities, right? By feeling that I can't be in them. And so we have had as humans 10,000 plus years to learn how to build communities in physical space. And they have a couple traits. They have a couple common tendencies that we see, and they have a purpose. Usually you are coming together, for a reason. You have a set of norms that you share with each other. There is, I think one of the most important things is a place to let down your guard, be vulnerable, and let yourself grow as a person by being exposed to others. Like, these are common traits in communities, right? And then boundaries, some set of space, some formal or informal sets of rules that you create, some formal and informal sets of systems for enforcing those rules with each other, and peer relationships. Like, those are all the sort of fundamentals. And you look at whatever, the Greek agora, or you look at like kids hanging out in a mall food court as they did when I was young, or you look at, people walking in a park, today. Community is sort of carried through in physical spaces in a lot of ways. And then online, we call a lot of things communities that don't fit those traits. First and foremost, we have a lot of spaces that have no purpose except to gather your data, right? So the people holding the space, they just want to surveil you, and they want to get your information about you, and then they want to sell it, or sell advertising against it. But other than that, there's no purpose to it. And I think that's one of the biggest causes of how communities fail, or they let people down online these days, is when you don't have a reason for gathering people. So that's sort of first and foremost. And in the case of Glitch, for people who don't know, it's a community where you can go in the browser and you can build an app just in your web browser, kind of the same way you write Google Docs. You could write code, and there's instantly this web app up and running, and that's really powerful for people. But it's not just, hey, the purpose is to come here and build an app. The idea is that you are building things you're going to share and collaborate on with others, right? And we've seen in almost every discipline, the idea that we're going to create together helps us make new kinds of work. And that's one of the things where when we realize, okay, well, we want to have a way for people to create together, then we have to have a community that supports that. And most of the other models for community were pretty unhealthy. We see harassment, we see abuse, and also we just see distraction, things that are like, even if you sort of take aside the worst examples of online behaviors, you see things that are just wear you down, that are like, I'm not having fun here. This is not joyous. And I talk about the team a lot. Like, we aspire to being a place where you feel good, not just that you're not actively being targeted by somebody being awful, but actually a place that you feel good. And that's something, I'm lucky. I get to hear every day from the Glitch community, but I think there are many other communities like this. People tell me every day, wow, this place, when I come to this community, I know what people are doing, and I know it's going to be something that's going to inspire me, or that I'm going to feel good or be delighted by. And that's the sign of a community is working.
Love it. And so the glitch community, it seemed to me like it kind of grew overnight in a way. I remember you like announcing you were launching Glitch, and you're like, we're going to build this community of developers and creators, and we're going to co-create together. And all of a sudden, like it really seemed like, wow, there it is. There's a community, and there's a lot of people contributing and a lot happening. Um, how did you do that? Like, I guess what does the community look like now from a numbers standpoint, and how did you go about kind of revving up that community so quickly?
Yeah. So the in terms of numbers and metrics, the things that we've shared publicly, probably the one that shocks me is people have built over 5 million apps on Glitch, right? And that is, for
Unbelievable.
context, like Apple's App Store has about 2 million apps. I think Google Play has about 2.5 million. So, and you
That's
know,
in like
it's
three
different
years,
things.
right?
Yeah, actually less than that ramp
Unbelievable.
up. And so, and that's not, it's apples and oranges, right? Like almost literally, because it's not, you're not going to go in and see some, in-app purchase game that's tied to a new comic book movie. Like that's not what people build on Glitch. They build tools for themselves or funny things. There's definitely a ton of people that are building apps for like keeping track of their turnips and Animal Crossing. So like it's still fun and connected to things, but it's this like personal desire or something that is solving a problem at work and that kind of thing. And the reason we've been able to get to that scale where there's, millions of creators and hundreds of thousands of people that are really actively engaged with helping each other out. I think there's a couple things that, again, start from how would you see the community in the real world? What's community organizing look like in your neighborhood if you're trying to clean up the park or, something like that, which is be for someone, not for everyone. So like first step was, who are people that, in our case, cared about the web, which is this kind of old fashioned idea. People are like, what does that mean? We're like, no, there's some people that like the web as a creative medium to them, just like there are people that love to make film and people that love to make photos and you can't stop people from making music. You know what I mean? And the worst, darkest times in history, people stuck all alone by themselves will make music for themselves. Like that speaks to the human creative impulse. And there are people for whom their medium is the web. And they have been unserved for many, many years. And they used to, back in the day, be on MySpace and make a page, or before that they were on LiveJournal, or before that they were on GeoCities, or they were on Black Planet. There were tens of millions of people for whom the web was a way to creatively express themselves. And then that all went away. Now you can have whatever you want as long as it's a blue bar at the top that says Facebook, right? And so there was this idea that there are people that want to express themselves. And so we just sort of said, okay, we know who we're for to start. Now, eventually we want to be for lots of people, but that's who we're for to start. So there's a lot of purpose there. And then you think, what do they need? What do they want? What are their pain points? How well do you understand them? Do you really know that community? Do you respect them enough to listen to them and give them what they want? And can you solve a problem for them in a way that nobody has? And then if you're of service, right? If you are just of service over time, people can't resist collaborating with you. They can't resist being in communion with you, as a community is. And I think it's sort of the same. You see the, in our neighborhood in New York City, we've got folks that are like, they drive me nuts, but I appreciate them, that are always feeding the squirrels, and like the squirrels are kind of pests and, like I don't love having them around. But on the other hand, now that I can't spend time watching them do this or see them all the time, you realize that's part of our community. There's somebody that they just do this thing that for them, it feels good to have squirrels running around the community. And so they want to do it. And I think that's sort of the sense that there are different ways of grooming or tending to a community or showing up over time to participate that tend to draw other people to you. And that's what's happened is each one teach one is like every time somebody makes something on Glitch and they feel like, wow, this is cool. I made something great. And I think that's true on any platform, but that's the one that I see. Your first impulse is to show it to somebody. Like how can you not? You know what I mean? My 9-year-old, if he built something with his Legos, he's not like, let me take it apart. He's like, let me show somebody. And I think we have the same impulse as adults.
And so you're finding that it's been a lot of organic growth. It's like existing members create something, they share it, that brings in new creators.
Oh yeah,
new developers.
We've never spent a penny on any advertising of any kind. We have essentially no presence on Facebook. We've never bought a Google ad. We've done no paid acquisition ever.
Where did that start? Where did the first 100 people come from that turned into 5 million apps being made?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I should be clear. We have a lot of privilege and advantages in being able to launch this thing. I'll give a little bit of history about the company, then I'll give some context. So the company that we call Glitch now actually started as a Fog Creek software back in 2000. Our co-founders, Joel Spolsky and Michael Pryor, had started it, and they are brilliant inventors. They are like geniuses who can come up with ideas all the time. And so over the years, they launched lots of different apps. The ones that, folks will know, Trello is probably best known amongst those. That was one of the things that spun out. Stack Overflow, which is the largest community of coders in the world, they co-created that. So they've had, and there's numerous other products. So they just like every couple of years would come up with a hit. And usually what they would do is sort of spin it out on its own, like we do with Stack Overflow, where I'm on the board and it's like its own company. But that same hackathon or creative process created the prototype of Glitch. And that was what I saw. And the founders were like, we're busy running these other giant successful companies that we've made. Can you come help us? I was like, these are big shoes to fill. But I saw the ability for people to create on Glitch, and I couldn't resist joining. I mean, I think anybody who loves that kind of like building tools was there. But the DNA of the company for 20 years now was, you treat your people right, you enable people to create, you build communities that share knowledge and help each other to create. You have a tool where people own their data and control their information and nothing creepy is happening with it. You have a business model people can understand. You pay them for a tool and they give you the tool, and it's very straightforward exchange. And you build for, in this case, the long term. I talk to the team all the time about, we've been around 20 years, we want to be around 20 more. Which I think is different from a lot of startups. Those were the predicate. That was the starting point. I got to walk into, a fully furnished house. Like, it was already up and running. And I just said, now we need to apply this same pattern, in an updated way, but in a modern way, but to Glitch. And so it wasn't hard to get started. One, in terms of just having a great, interesting platform that was built, but two, to reach out to users, because we had trust that had been earned from the previous things. People said, oh, yeah, you gave me these other tools that I use all the time. Maybe it's worth taking a look at your thing. And so they were willing to come take a look.
Yeah. So you had that a foundation, an audience, you are well followed online. So you're able to kind of tap into an existing audience that you build a lot of trust with and earn that over time. And when you said, hey, we're building this thing, people were interested.
Yeah, it's not very helpful advice, but step one is start 20 years ago.
That's right. It's like when's the best time to plant a tree? 50 years ago. When's the second best time now?
Today. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so switching gears a little bit, I want to kind of get your bigger picture thoughts, especially with everything happening.
Sure.
A very common conversation in the world of community for business is this kind of there's building to help members, to help people, to like do the right thing, and then there's profit, which is a dirty word sometimes, right?
Right.
Or it's perceived to be. Like, I don't think it is, but it's perceived to be. And they often seem like they're at odds. And I think every community professional who's been hired, they're getting paid to do a job for a company, but that job is to build community. They at some point feel this tension of I'm trying to build authentic, meaningful community, and I have a business that has business goals and is trying to achieve profit and understandably needs to have a business outcome, and they're paying me money, and they need to have the money to pay me, right? And so there's this interesting kind of
there's a tension
there's a tension, right? So yeah, I guess I'm just curious, as someone who's thought a lot about ethical tech, how do you think about that balance of community, which is essentially just like being human driven, and profit?
It comes down to leadership and business model, right? So I'm a CEO now, but when I started working in community, I started, like I think a lot of people, very bottom of the org chart, very outward facing, but no power to actually change things when the community would tell me something was wrong. And so product would say they couldn't do it, and the business side or sales could say they couldn't do it, and executives would tell me they couldn't do it. And I think it's a lot of the stress of community is, the people in this conversation, the people in the CMX community know what to do. They know how to do right by their community, and then they can't a lot of times, right? And it's usually for reasonable reasons. It's never the CEO is like, no, we hate people. We want to be mean to people. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't know what we can do given our business model. I don't know what we can do. And where I think that a lot of the burden lies is on leaders to really understand community. They get very isolated from it. They think of community management as a thing you delegate to somebody and let me know when it's done, and to come back in and sort of say, well, have you architected your entire business model and your entire approach to the company that you're creating or the organization you're creating towards serving your community? And that's hard. That's very hard. I mean, I take a look at Stack Overflow, one of our, spin out companies and where I'm still on the board. They designed, this very positive community where people answer each other's questions is very valuable. And there's challenges too, where it's like people aren't always welcoming enough because they're very focused on like, got to get the right answer. So did you say it in the right way? Is it, and that's a politeness challenge, but it's not like roving bands of harassers on the site. It's, sort of a different community challenge. But the core thing is there is no tension between here's a public site for asking questions about code and getting answers. And here's a tool you can take to work and ask questions about code and get answers, right? There's perfect compatibility between the business model of go and pay for this at work and the one that's, public. I think that shows the thoughtfulness and the anticipation of making sure community was compatible with the business. And I think a lot of them aren't that. I think a lot of business models put business management in tension with community management because they're sort of saying, if you do right by your community, you are going to harm the bottom line, and we don't want to let you do it. And I think that's the part where if you have the opportunity to push on this, is to be able to say, how could we rethink this? These things can be compatible. They don't fundamentally have to be in tension. That is not the case.
Totally. Yeah, I think finding that alignment, that's where companies really thrive. We saw a lot of examples today from speakers. Erica Cool from Salesforce is a great example, really led with intention and purpose and got buy-in from Benioff and from executive leadership. They didn't necessarily understand it fully at first, but now you see Benioff, it's like all, Ohana and community and impact and is putting money behind that in a very real way.
And he's right. They're right.
Last question, and then we're probably going to get the Oscar music kicking us off. But we'll try to keep it brief. But I think one thing that's really important we're all thinking about right now is what the future looks like and how the current crisis is going to affect how we build community. And I think a lot back to 9/11. I was a kid then. I remember watching it from my high school window in New York, in Long Island. And just like, but I was a kid. I didn't really travel before that, so I don't really register this as well as other people. But there wasn't TSA before that, right? After 9/11, we had TSA, and it just kind of like changed forever.
No, my quarantine beard is definitely not TSA compliant. I'll tell you that.
Well, so that's the question, right? People with brown skin were treated not fairly when they're traveling anymore, and had a lot of issues with TSA and continue to have issues with TSA. And so we built these new systems to keep us safe, but that came at the expense of a lot of people. And we're seeing some similar things now already with coronavirus, with like students can't access digital education because they don't have access to the same kind of technology. And we're seeing the income gap play a huge role in what kind of privileges people have now and are able to weather the storm, and the people who don't. And so what are the things that you think we need to focus on as we move forward building community to continue to be inclusive and be mindful of those kinds of discrepancies?
That's a tough one to get to quickly, but I'll try to touch on a couple points there. I think, first of all, thank you for raising it. I think this is a critical question. And I am fortunate to be running a company that was around during 9/11, based in downtown Manhattan. And that, I wasn't working with the company at the time, but the company I was working with was impacted, and I couldn't go downtown. And many people have forgotten there were anthrax attacks right after 9/11. And the company that I worked at the time was one of those targeted. So we had people with N95 masks and rubber gloves in the office. And so some of this echoes, a really, really trying time. And you try to think about what lessons can you learn and can you share? And I think, you know, on the negative side, that there are downsides you don't anticipate, that well-intentioned remedies, well-intentioned solutions can have these negative side effects that you don't anticipate that make things worse. I think it's really, really important, because there's a tendency for a defensive response to all those people, but they mean well. They're well-intended, right? And it's like, well, but what's the actual impact? I think that's a really critical question. The other thing is, you know, being honest, being in Manhattan right now, a lot of people, when I talk to, I do all these Zoom calls and everything like everybody else, they're like, oh, are you going to stay in the city? I'm like, God, yes. I wouldn't be anywhere but New York right now, you know? And it's very hard to explain to people why. Like, there's a very deep-seated emotional piece. And it actually, this sounds corny, but it's true. The answer is community. New York was the community that was there for me at what previously had been the hardest challenge I'd seen in my adult life, when I couldn't go to work, when everything was disrupted, when everybody was scared, when we didn't know what the threat was of being out in public. There was a sense of community, and I saw people picking each other up and dusting each other off and building something together. And I said, I was like, I know I'm going to be in New York City the rest of my life because of what, on the afternoon of September 11th, what I saw. I knew I would be here the rest of my life. And that was real community of people making themselves vulnerable to strengthen others, you know, of just being there. And then sort of in the same moment right now, you know, where I live across the street from one of the major hospitals in the city here. And, you know, every night it's everybody out their windows, banging pots and pans and cheering people on. And it's hard, you know, we have a culture and society that wants to dismiss that as corny or to have an ironic distance from it. And it's because you have to be very open emotionally to say, I'm going to embrace this corny thing. You know what I mean? I'm going to be part of it. But then if you make that leap, you make that little bit of bravery that you extend towards saying, I'm going to show my humanity to these other people. They reciprocate. We can't not do it as humans. And that's true in a business context too. That is true as we build communities, as our craft, as our work, is that we can make places where people are comfortable to be themselves and to share themselves with the world and open themselves up to others. And we're going to have more and more of our lives mediated by technology. There's no question about it. We were spending hours a day with our thumb on the glass of our phones before this happened. And that's only going to go up. And so the choices we make in building community online and building technology online will have even more impact in deciding what human connection looks like and what kinds of communities we're able to form. And if we can ground that and center that in more of the technology we use being created by communities, not just foisted upon communities, then we can probably change things so that we can enable the same kind of community to happen online as innately happens offline. I mean, I know that's my work. That's been my work for 20 years. I hope that's the work the rest of my life. I think it's going to take that long to make the progress we need to. But I'm excited we get to have these kinds of conversations with people that want to do the same kind of work too.
Awesome. Love it. Great note to end on. Anil, thank you so much for being here, and just really grateful for the work that you do, and your voice over all the years of my career has been consistent, and it's reassuring, right? Like sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm not cut out for business because I'm not.
Same.
I don't know, too nice. I don't know. Even New York, I live in San Francisco now. I'm like, it was kind of harsh here. I'll probably be back. But having your voice as a role model and an example for us to follow, and calling truth to power even when it doesn't serve your immediate business needs, it's been inspiring, and I'm really just grateful for you. So thank you for all the work you do, and thanks for joining us.
That's so kind. Thank you for having me.